Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Easy Conversations podcast, a podcast about having easy conversations. I'm your host, Furkan Dandia. In this week's episode, I sit down with a mindfulness teacher, therapist, and author, Frances Trussel. Frances shares her own experience and what brought her on the journey of mindfulness and choosing happiness. Frances and I talk about the importance of our mindset and how we can manifest happiness into our lives. We also discuss the value of meditation and working through our busy brains. I hope you can get a lot out of this episode, and if at the end you can leave a 5-star review, I would truly appreciate it. All right, Frances, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. I'm really grateful for you to take the time today and have this conversation with me. Super excited to hear the work you're doing and kind of focus on some of the things that I'm trying to help men with, or the message I'm trying to put out there. So I'm, just excited to have this conversation today. But before we get started, I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, some of the work you're doing, and I believe you also have your own podcast. Is that correct?
Yeah, I do. So actually, my podcast is just full of meditations. So a long time ago, I've been working in the mindfulness and meditation field for a long time. So I started off teaching in kind of dusty church halls and would burn off CDs of meditations and hand them out, back in the old days.
Yeah.
And I had a client come along once and say, what's going to be big in the future? Podcasts. Why don't I create this podcast, and then your clients can just use that to access meditations? So so it's been knocking about for quite some time, and it is simply meditation audios, and everybody is free to access those. So it's the Mindfully Happy podcast. Yay.
Yeah, and then tell us a little bit about yourself and what's the work you're doing, and what is Mindfully Happy all about?
Well, Mindfully Happy is all about living a life that is happier and more joyful, but not from this place. We kind of had a bit of a pre-talk about toxic positivity, and I will spin back to that, but not about a place of being happy and acting your way through it, because certainly that's not what life is all about. It's about this full joyful experience of what it is to be alive through experiencing all emotion. And so my own backstory is that I wasn't living that way. I was doing a lot of acting. I'm formerly a broadcast journalist. I was in the media. I did quite well, but actually I was portraying this one surface image of existence, a lot of perhaps toxic positivity, when actually it was utter bullshit, really. Underneath, I was really struggling, and I acted my way through life for a really long time until I couldn't do it anymore. And from a real burnout and breakdown really came the breakthrough for me, because having tried over the years, I'd suffered with anxiety and depression since childhood, and I'd tried so many different types of therapy. And but when I finally found mindfulness, it absolutely transformed everything for me. It meant that I began to live in a completely new way and see things in a new light, to fall back in love with what it was to be alive again. And back then, over a decade ago, certainly here in the UK, mindfulness, it wasn't widely known. And so I just felt utterly compelled to completely change my direction in life and share what I had found with as many people as possible. And that's how Mindfully Happy was formed. I trained to be a teacher. I did lots of training in various different directions, because I love the neuroscience behind it. I love all of the ancient history behind it, and the Zen lineage, and it all just fascinated me. And so teaching it became my absolute passion, and I was very, very fortunate to meet lots of wonderful people who A lot of them at the time were really struggling themselves, and to be able to share the joy of what it is to live in this different way where we relate to our thoughts and feelings and our experience of life differently. And from there, that grew, and my practice grew, and I do a lot of speaking, I do a lot of coaching still, one-to-one, as well as lots of group stuff and retreats and book writing and all this kind of thing. And it's such a joy. It's such a joy. And the essential thing within that for me is to know that from the very darkest of places, and I was absolutely suicidally depressed, you know, the most beautiful of things can come. We say in Zen, no mud, no lotus. And certainly sometimes we've really got to get through the shit and really dig into it, to actually find that spark that inspires us to grow and live in a new, wonderful way.
No, that's amazing and beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And you did mention you've got a book out there as well. And what is that all about? Is it the same message that you're talking about right now? Is that's essentially in the book, or there's more to it?
So it's a very simple book, actually. It's called You Are Not Your Thoughts. You Are Not Your Thoughts, The Secret Magic of Mindfulness. And for me, that was the penny drop. The You Are Not Your Thoughts, really not just kind of understanding it on a conceptual level, but really knowing it, really. So it shifted something within me, that knowing that I wasn't my thoughts, and it kind of broke this spell for me personally of being under a hypnosis almost from the weight of negativity that existed inside of my head. It had been casting this veil over all of my experience of life, and being able to lift that veil to see things clearly was really revolutionary personally for me, and I've seen it be so revolutionary for people since. And so that's the very essence of the book. Actually, it's very, very stripped back. It's very, very simple. How can we know this very concept for ourselves? And I actually wrote it a very long time ago. I wrote it when I first discovered that great understanding, and in a way it kind of just flowed through me, and it was written not really for anybody else but for myself, as a map to find my way back to that very root should I get lost again. Because, you know, there is this great fear when you've been to those deep, dark places, and, you know, and it's still there in the back of most of us. What if I go back there? What if things slip? What if, you know, that veil drops down again? And so for me personally, it was just a way of expressing. And because I was a journalist, writing was the way that felt right for me. And I actually wrote the book, and I sent it off to a couple of agents and didn't hear anything, as you do, and then I kind of forgot all about it. And in a way there was this huge level of imposter syndrome with, who the hell am I to write this book on mindfulness? And I kind of parked it, forgot all about it. And then many years subsequent, I met somebody on a retreat who happened to have read some of my blog pieces and said, I love your writing style. Do you have anything else? And I said, oh, I did write a book a while ago. And so she said, please, please, please send it to me. And I did. And she worked in publishing. And lo and behold, a few days later, I had a publishing contract. So it was a beautiful serendipity of coming together. Obviously, by that time, I kind of looked back through, and there were lots of things that I changed and altered, because I had worked with so many people since and seen the elements that really helped those individuals the most. And I wanted to make sure that the book contained that also. But it was a beautiful series of serendipities that kind of made it come out into the world.
No, that's an amazing story. And I guess part of it is like, when you have that positive mindset, you almost manifest all these things for yourself, right? And that's where I want to kind of tap into a little bit around our thoughts, because I feel like the negative thoughts almost become your truth because you start believing in them. And um and like for me, I understand where a lot of these negative thoughts come from, because I've put in the work as well. But why, like, why do people get stuck in that? Like, what have you been able to find, and how have you been able to help people shift their mindset where, yeah, it's okay to have these negative thoughts. They are there for a reason, but it's being able to label them and understand the source so you can actually deal with the source. That's kind of how I've been able to navigate through that. But what are some of the things you do with the people you come across or work with?
Well, firstly, it's important to recognize those thoughts are very compelling, aren't they? The storylines we weave are so compelling. And we get used to listening to them on repeat. And it is so incredible how much impact those words are having, and because so much of it we're oblivious to because we're just moving around our day-to-day life, we're on the autopilot, and that same story is playing out, it begins to become our truth. It's only when we step out of autopilot that we can see those thoughts for what they are. And unfortunately, the majority of people, the majority of the time, are just trapped in autopilot. They're just living almost like sleepwalking through life. And it's a lot of the time, it's not until we have something that really squeezes us. So for many people, a real serious incident in life or a deep depression, that actually it's not until that squeeze comes that there becomes a questioning. And I've lost count of the hundreds of times I've heard people say, I just feel like I can't live like this anymore. And quite often that really is the spark that makes us go, okay, who is this person that can't live like this anymore? And actually, how can I break free from this? And so when we have that, when we've been squeezed enough to look at it, something happens, because it's like we shift in our perspective slightly, and we can see these things differently. So quite often that is the catalyst. However, how do we go about that? Well, for me personally, it was through meditation. And I'm sure even saying those words, there will be some people listening who do a little eye roll, like, oh God, another person telling me to meditate. Well, I can't meditate. My mind's too busy. But actually, we're not meditating to become incredible meditators. My mind, after many years of meditating, is still often incredibly busy. What we're doing is we're meditating to actually change our relationship to our thoughts. Mm-hmm. So that we can live more fully and more present and more engaged. Mm-hmm. So how do we change our relationship to our thoughts? The first point is that recognition that actually we're separate to our thoughts. And it's not until we do this thing of sitting back from our thoughts and looking at them for what they are that we get to witness that for ourselves. And so for me personally, that was a huge aha in a meditation. So sitting in a meditation and like being, doing the normal thing that most of us do when we're new to meditation, of kind of like, there's so many things, it's like, oh God, it's so busy in there. And then actually being able to just have a split second of, well, where am I and where are the thoughts? Okay, I'm here and the thoughts are there. Oh, okay, so that's me watching my thoughts. And it's from this process that we begin to be able to step back more and more from our thoughts. And so in terms of training people, I like to talk about this idea of a train of thought. And normally, we are jumping from one train to the next, from one train to the next. And the trains are always taking us away from the present, into the past, into the future, into judgment, away from here. And so our job during meditation is to sit at the station of our thoughts, to allow the trains to come, to recognize them for what they are, but to say, and in this moment of we can actually refrain from getting on board. And when we do it, when we witness it for the first time, it can be so incredibly transformative because, wow, look at me. I saw that thought, but I didn't get on board. I allowed it to come. I allowed it to go away again. How revolutionary can this be for my life if I recognize that I'm separate to thoughts and that I don't have to go on every journey? Because we know, don't we, those repetitious journeys, particularly as you mentioned, those negative loop-de-loops that we do with those same old stories coming up time and time again, to be able to see that coming along down the tracks, to kind of know almost like, oh, that's the destination. I've been on this train a few times, but to be able to not get on board, boom, this is the key to self-mastery. This is the key to changing the relationship to thought, because thought is just thought. It's only thought. It's just a fluctuation of the mind. What gives a thought its power, its prominence, is us. And the way that we're relating to it, the way that we're clinging to it, the way that we're pushing away from it, the way that we're struggling with it. How would it be to not have to struggle with those thoughts anymore? Because after all, who is it that's doing the struggling?
Yeah, no, I think that's such a great, I love that analogy of the train. I've actually never heard it before, surprisingly. So I love it. And I think one of the things I try to tell the people, like especially like men within my circle, is, it's okay. I think people have created this image of meditation that you just get into the Zen state immediately, but it's never the case, right? Like you say, you've been doing it for so many years and you still have a busy mind. And I think that's okay. Like it's being, like you said, it's being able to accept the thoughts that come to you, but then move on from them, right? Like understand that those thoughts are going to come, but focus on your breathing and let those thoughts pass through you. And that's kind of what I try to tell people. And I think when you get to that point where you can just focus on your breathing and let the thoughts come, like you said, you're able to not jump on board, but you know why they're there, what the purpose they're serving. And you can, I think, ideally work past all those thoughts and get to a state where you don't fall into that trap.
Yes, because actually it's about recognizing that they're all just thoughts. Apparently, whatever it is, 60,000 thoughts a day, the majority of which are nonsense, the majority of which are repetition. So what is making a thought about a hairdressing appointment? It would come, it would go, we're not bothered about it. And then we have a thought about, getting old and dying alone and being eaten by Alsatians or whatever it is. And like that, that is really important thought. No, they're equally just fluctuations of the mind. And the more that we can stop getting on board the negative trains, the more that we actually create space for all the good, juicy, wonderful thoughts that are going to enrich our life. But if we're just on the repetitive loop-de-loop, there's no space for so much more incredible thought and opportunity and creativity to come in. And when you kind of mentioned this idea of a law of attraction to our thoughts and synchronicities, and actually it's like when we have this ability to step back from thought, suddenly what we're allowing is actually just more of the stuff that's already there, hidden under the negativity, to come to the fore. What we're allowing is more opportunities to naturally come into view. They were already there, we just couldn't see them because we had so much focus contracted in onto negative thought. And this is about this process actually of expanding and just not placing too much. We all have weird thoughts, disturbing thoughts, horrendous thoughts. And actually, that's okay. They're just thoughts. And this is really, really important, because before I recognized that I wasn't my thoughts, I thought I was a horrendous person because I had so much judgment, so many negative thoughts in there, so many. And actually, if I thought that that was me and I was identifying with it, which I did at the time, that was just a horrendous place to be, and it made me feel like an awful person. You know what? We all have a whole range of ridiculous thoughts. Don't give them power. Don't give them importance. And you can claim back that power by learning this process of sitting back from them, just watching them come and go.
No, and that's amazing. And I think whether it's mindfulness or meditation, the whole point is to sit in stillness and watching the thoughts come and watching them leave, right? Like you use the train analogy. You're not getting on board, it's just passing through. And I feel like we don't normally get to have that vision if we're not sitting in stillness. And being in stillness can look like anything, right? And that's what I try to tell people. Like, again, it's this image of meditating, like sitting there, and like I find like I can meditate while walking or just being somewhere, even if there's people around. I don't necessarily need to be in a quiet room. I can choose to meditate wherever I want. It can be whatever you want it to be, but as long as you're sitting in stillness and you're able to process those thoughts, I think that's ultimately the goal.
Absolutely. And also recognize that thoughts are just one element of our experience. It's our focus, our attention, that's the important thing. Actually, for the most part, we're really zoomed in on the voice inside our head. And actually, it's about recognizing, well, how would it be? How different potentially could my life be if, rather than being contracted around those thoughts, I can learn to expand my awareness to take in more of my experience? Because actually, most of the good stuff doesn't happen in our thoughts about stuff, because that's projection and reflection. The good stuff of life happens in this expanded state of awareness where we are feeling life, where we're being, where we're experiencing directly without that filter. And so in a way, it's just learning to be a bit more playful with that and catching ourselves. Oh, look at me getting all contracted around my thoughts again. Can I expand? Will we find that in a single breath, in a single sip of our coffee, actually, boom, back in the room. I have expanded. I don't have to spend my whole life trapped in my skull, rattling around with all of those thoughts. That's not where life lives. Life lives in the here and now, and in this fabulous direct experience that we get if we can learn to expand and just not give thoughts so much importance. Just think less and live more.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I wanted to explore, and you touched on it briefly, was the whole toxic positivity that a lot of people are talking about now. And like I do want to get your perspective on it, like, because what I hear people say is like, oh, like there's that spin on it that, okay, you can't just have a positive outlook all the time. Like you need to focus on or accept the negative things that happen to you, or if you've had a really bad experience, it's okay to say, yeah, that was a really bad experience. And where I see the difference in terms of what you're talking about and what I truly believe in is, yes, you can accept the negative experience or the situation, but you can choose on how you let it define you. And if you choose to believe that, yeah, I'm a terrible person or I'm worthless and these things continue to happen to me, those are the thoughts you're going to live with, and that's how you're going to manifest your future. Or you can decide that, okay, yeah, this is a really bad experience, it sucks right now, but this is not who I am, or this doesn't define me. And that's where I see that it's choosing to believe what you want to, and the thoughts you want in your head. And I think that's different than toxic positivity, where you just put a positive spin on everything.
Absolutely. It's essential that we allow ourselves to feel. Now,
Mm-hmm.
we're hardwired, obviously, to turn away from pain and to turn towards pleasure. And in some ways, it would kind of be nice to just be able to hang out in that zone all the time. But that's not what life is. Life is a full, rich tapestry, and we will experience the highs and we will experience the lows. And the more that we can enable ourselves to navigate that from a place of wisdom, actually, to know, we all know this too shall pass, whatever it is, we will enable ourselves to have just a deeper, richer experience of life by not just trying to be positive all the time, because actually it's bullshit. It's not true. It isn't life. And life is to be lived and loved fully. The truth is, if you open yourself up enough to love, then you are going to feel pain. You are
Mm-hmm.
seriously going to feel pain. But what's the alternative? To just turn yourself off from love and not feel, we'll just smother ourselves in this nice bit of cotton wool, and we'll not really ever open up. And so actually we're missing out on what it is to truly live and to truly be alive. And as you know, I work largely with men. Really, it's about
Mm-hmm.
75% of my work is with men, and this is something that I see time and time again. This shying away from the full depth of human experience, and having learned through whether it's culturally, whether it's to do with society expectations, to kind of shut off a lot, to shut off, to avoid feeling any extremes of emotion. And actually, what then is happening is there's just this shutting off from life, shutting off from a direct experience of feeling everything and anything. And as we do so, our inner being, who we really are, our authentic self, is kind of kicking and screaming in there, because that is not the point of being alive. And so often what I find with depression, severe depression and anxiety in the men that I treat, is actually there's this full human being that's trying to explode out of them, and they've just been not listening to the call of that for so long. And the thing with this this need, this drive to actually live a full human experience, it wants to be expressed. And if you don't listen, it will knock louder and louder and louder until it's almost unbearable. You have to listen. But unfortunately, that is why we do see so much tragedy, so much suicide, so many men really not knowing what to do with this strength of emotion that's arising. And what I would say is, embrace it, express it, be it, let it out. We're not here to just sugarcoat over things and avoid experiencing the full range of human emotion. We're here to experience it all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, that's yeah, I couldn't have said it any better. And I think part of it is, like, as men, and I was in that situation too, where you just bottle everything up, and and again, for me, it was mostly like, okay, this is what society's told me to do. And I've experienced that, like, where you're just imploding. And then for me, it came, and I've shared this story, but it came to a point where I was like, okay, well, is this the life I want to live? Like, I want to be, one day turn 80 and look back and be like, well, yeah, I checked off all these boxes, I followed all the rules, but for what? what was the point of it? And it's, I can understand why a lot of men try to shut themselves off, because it is easier to shut yourself off in the moment and not experience the emotion, but you miss out on so much in life. And yeah, sometimes it's going to hurt, it's going to suck, but it's totally worth it for just being able to accept yourself and live life fully.
Absolutely.
And I think, going back to like the stuff you talked about in terms of toxic positivity as well, I think it's being able to, like, for me, one of the things that I've started doing is giving myself a timeline, and in situations where something unfortunate happens or it doesn't go the way I wanted it to go, of course it's disappointing, and it's okay for me to feel disappointed. I think there's this other aspect where people have created the shame and guilt around feeling disappointed, and one of the things I've started doing is giving myself a timeline. Is like, okay, you know what, I'm going to feel this disappointment, I'm going to feel this hurt, but I'm going to feel it for the next day or two. I'm really going to sit in it and let myself, like, I'm going to cry about it or whatever, right? But that's not going to be my forever. I'm not going to carry this on for like a week or 2 weeks. It's my message to myself that it's okay to feel the emotions and then come out of it and start having that, again, positive mindset, and not feeling guilty. Because I think what would happen for me, at least, was I would sit in that space and be miserable and then feel guilty about it. Yeah. And then feel miserable. And it just became this perpetual cycle, and I couldn't get my head out of it. But by telling myself, just accept it for what it is for 2 days, 3 days, whatever. After that, let's go. We got to start. It's like going to the gym. It's like, okay, I've had a bad weekend. I ate some chips or ice cream, but on Monday, I'm going to go to the gym again. So it's having that mindset. That's what's helped me.
Yeah. And I think that will really resonate with people. Everybody knows what it's like to kind of get into those cycles. So, I mean, a couple of things there, when it's stuff that when we want to have a wallow. Yeah. I call it, I actually was having this conversation with a client earlier in the week, who quite enjoys having a bit of a strop. I don't know if that word translates. Having a bit of a strop, like having a bit of a wallow. And we were talking about having designated hippo time, like as a hippo wallowing in the mud. Like, actually, I'm really annoyed about this, but I'm almost going to have this awareness of what I'm doing, and I'm going to indulge in a little bit of misery here, and I'm going to really let myself go for it, but maybe just for 45 minutes. And if we can have that awareness of ourselves and also have almost a bit of humor, it's okay to embrace all of these different sides of emotion, of our personality. That's perfectly okay. But bringing that awareness in, and as you say, kind of segmenting or ring fencing certain amounts of time and going, you know what, I'm not going to half-ass this, I'm going to really go for it, I'm going to be really miserable for 45 minutes. Or even with some clients, it really helps to get the pen and paper out and just scribble down all these reasons why this person has really pissed me off, or and that can be a really, really useful, cathartic thing to do. But as you say, having that open-ended is really unhelpful. Having that ring fence can be really, really useful. So it's okay to do that. But I'm kind of talking about it in a light-hearted way. For some people, who will be listening, that's all well and good over minor incidents, but when it is like really big life stuff or a trauma, then that needs to be honored in a really different way. And it's so easy for these things to define us, and it's almost, it actually isn't our fault, because when trauma happens, or anything that kind of flags in the brain as a serious threat, then we will, the way that the brain treats that is to not store it effectively and process it effectively as just a memory. Actually, it gets stored as a trauma memory. And then anything, we call it a pattern match. So anything that's kind of similar to that, we can feel really triggered. And so it's really important also to recognize when that has happened and have a bit of self-compassion. First off, like, actually, I'm finding this really triggering, but that's my brain trying to protect me. It's trying to look out for me, because ultimately our brains don't care whether we're happy. They just want us to survive. And if it's kind of registered something as like, this is a serious threat, then it will keep flagging up. So actually, when that has happened, it's really important to get the right type of therapy to just be able to process that. And actually, now the therapy process for certain things like trauma, it doesn't have to be prolonged. It doesn't have to be exhausting and agonizing. We have some really, because we understand the brain now so much better, we have some really fantastic therapy techniques that very, very quickly can help us process trauma and actually take lots of the emotional charge out of that. So they're separate things, but yeah, everyone should be able to feel what they need to feel in the moment.
Yeah, and I think just going back to like, it's basically moving past the shame as well, right? Like you said, accept those situations, those triggers, but don't feel bad about it. And I think that's where people also get stuck, is they're just I mean, it's easier to talk about it, but they just, not only are they feeling something very uncomfortable and difficult, or they're going through a very difficult situation, they're also shaming themselves about it. And that's where it's, I feel bad when I watch it. I'm like, hey, listen, it's okay to feel that way. It's okay to handle it however you're handling it, because you just don't know right now how to manage this. This is not your forever, but don't feel bad about whatever happened or how you're handling this. Like, that's even worse, right? And that's what I try to tell people, is just accept it. It's okay. This is gonna pass.
Absolutely. And with many things, we can't choose how the brain has processed an event. So it's, it's not us actively choosing to be difficult in a certain situation, or fear going to a party, or whatever it is. We haven't chosen that for ourselves. It's just how the brain has processed that. What we can choose is whether we then look at that and do something about it, or whether we just spend the rest of our lives beating ourselves, why am I so socially awkward and useless? And well, that's really unhelpful. We can do something about it.
Yes. And I think it's recognizing that, and I've talked about this before too, is recognizing why the brain's threat response is kicking in. And, again, it's built a pattern. It's almost like an algorithm, right? It's like it picks up on these hints and boom, it responds. But the second you become aware of it and mindful of it, you're able to choose differently as well. And that's what I try to help people with, or at least the conversations I try to have. But, I think this has been really, really amazing. And, I just love the energy you bring. Like, I'm super grateful for again having this conversation, and I hope listeners get a lot out of it, and they can also feel your energy through the audio. But any last words of advice as we come to a close here that you want to share with people, especially right now? As you can imagine, it's been a really tough time, and I'm seeing a lot of people struggle. And I hope people are seeking help or just having conversations like this. But what are some things you want to tell people, like, that are really struggling at this time?
Don't believe everything you think. Don't believe everything that you think. Really, there are so many ways that you can help yourself, but don't feel guilty for feeling really shit right now, because we're in a really difficult time. And that is okay. There is absolutely no shame in having the emotions that you're having. But there is a way. There is a way that you can help yourself, and I have lots of free resources. If you just search Frances Trussel or Mindfully Happy, there are various. A really good one for people that I'm finding at the moment who are stuck in overthink. I've got a video on YouTube called How to Stop Worry and Overthinking, and it's a really quick, easy, fantastic technique to just break those worry cycles, which are the things that really start to drag us down when we start getting in that repetitious state. So I would say that's a really great place to start. Just know you are not your thoughts, and that actually this is temporary. It's all temporary. In the great scheme of things, we are a fleck of stardust in an absolute moment of time, and everything will change. And I really just send everybody so much love, because we all just need to be more lovely to each other,
Mm-hmm.
and that really shifts everything.
Yeah, yeah, and the other thing I would add is, you're also not alone, right? Like everyone's kind of experiencing their own adversity or struggles, and we're not alone in this. And like you said, the more we can like show love to each other, we can show support to each other, and just be a community of people that are all striving to move forward. That's where I think we can all get through this together as well. So I just want to reiterate that. For people that want to get a hold of you or find you online or social media, I know you've talked about Mindfully Happy, but what are some of the ways people can find you?
Yeah, I mean, just all of the things. Mindfullyhappy.com, mindfully happy on YouTube, mindfully happy on Instagram. So yeah, you will absolutely find me. And also, you are not your thoughts. If you search that, it's kind of sold everywhere. So
Okay. No, thank you again so much for coming on here and having this conversation with me. I really appreciate it.
great, fabulous, really good to connect.
Well, that's the end of the episode. Thank you again for tuning in. As always, please leave a 5-star review. And until next week.